Hey there everyone, and welcome back for the second season of Confronting Evil. Where will the lone survivor of the remaining duo turn to next? We're about to find out. So, get settled in, because it's that time you've all been waiting for. Welcome back to the return of Confronting Evil. Shroud of Turin in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist, believed to be the burial shroud of Jesus Christ, home in the city of Turin, Italy, or as it was known in Italian, Torino. The girl rolled out of the assembly line in Lorain, Ohio, in the United States, far away from her namesake. Her first owner was a teenager that took great care of her, until he almost wrapped her around a telephone pole. Then his parents decided he should sell her and get a more suitable car for a kid his age. The guy that bought it was a bit of a daredevil. He had wrecked nearly every car that he had owned because he was very responsible. Drinking, reckless driving, running from the law, and playing chicken. All of this and more. Nothing was beyond the adrenaline junkie and party animal. 120 miles per hour down the highway in Pennsylvania, almost lost control and nearly took out a family that had stalled out on the side of the road, just missed them by mere inches. The help they had called came with an officer that witnessed the incident, which led to a high-speed chase before it was finally stopped by spike strips. The guy fled on foot and was eventually apprehended by law enforcement a few blocks away. The car was impounded and auctioned, where a guy from upstate New York got a great deal. A middle-aged businessman type that bought the car to impress the ladies. However, his money attracted the wrong type of people, and he was nearly gunned down while driving his black beauty. Her windows were shattered, but both she and her driver went away relatively untouched. He went into witness protection, and she was auctioned off once more. This time, it was to a young man with the name of Beretta. He had big dreams for her. He gave her a much-needed tune-up, fixed all her little issues that she had gotten over the years of abuse, gave her new windows, a new coat of paint, a metallic dark teal. She was a beauty. He had her for years, drove her everywhere, kept her healthy and running perfectly, wash, wax, and polish. His car, his beautiful girl, got him through some really rough spots, even when he started running into some really messed up stuff. He found himself the target of a family of vampires. There were twins that appeared forever at the age of around 10, a boy and a girl, an older brother, a teenager, a mother and a father, and finally, an elderly grandmother. All of them were frozen in time at the point of their infection, and all of them very hungry as they swiftly chased down the speeding Torino. They clawed at her windows and scratched away at her paint until finally headlights appeared in the rearview mirror of the Torino. One by one, the chasing family of vampires were dispatched, their corpses burning away with hellfire as they were gunned down by darts from a crossbow. And that's how he met his partner in life and partner in hunting things beyond the natural, a woman by the name of Shiloh. The two of them settled down and started a family in a farmhouse in upstate New York. They had a set of twins, and for a couple of years, everything was calm, peaceful, and fun for the loving family. That is, until the cursed belt came onto the scene and tore everything apart. The man met his fate and left behind a wife and 2 small children, only toddlers at the time, and his other baby girl the dark teal Ford Torino, sat within the old barn, covered by a sheet and a decade's worth of dust, before a curious girl pulled her out and started her up once more. The twins had grown into teenagers, and Mackenzie was a bit of a rambunctious girl, while Seth was more interested in academics. The two of them were drawn into a life that was thrust upon them at a young age. They grew up with the knowledge of things beyond the understanding of average folk, and they studied and practiced means of disposing the things that dwell in the darkness. They grew up, and the old girl was a faithful steed for their many journeys. She was there to get them out of many tight spots, but when the man with one red eye enacted his plan, the old girl was his first victim that night, torn asunder by the mutated hands of monsters and left in a field so that her owner could not make her escape. However, Mackenzie could not escape, and much like their home, she was drawn into the darkness, sucked up into the hellish landscape of the other side, beyond the opening of the hellmouth where the devils dwell. Seth was lost without his sister. He withdrew from everyone and spent his time studying for college, a path he decided to take after the loss of Mackenzie. And when he wasn't studying his school subjects, he was studying mechanics, where he used his knowledge to restore the old, destroyed Torino into a brand new version of her beautiful self. He spent long hours on schoolwork, only to head outside of Huck's camper and into the barn, the only thing left of the Beretta property, where he would work on the car all night. The Torino made him feel connected to his sister, whose grave lay empty on the cemetery hill, and the Torino was all that he had left of her and of their father. Seth entered the camper and sat down at the little kitchenette. He was exhausted and covered in grease and oil stains. He reached over to the compact refrigerator and pulled out a beer. The tired man stared blankly and popped it open. It had been months since his sister's disappearance, and he still felt the same as he did that night. Cold. Broken. He was studying history, language, everything he could in order to find some bit of knowledge to help him in his search. Seth sat back against the plastic-covered seat and scrolled through the pictures on his phone. Images of the forbidden book that had gotten him to where he was, and the same book that he hoped would bring his sister back to him. After nearly non-stop work, he was finally on the cusp of discovery. Huck had used a banishment spell, but something went wrong. It didn't work the way it was intended, and it sucked up everything like a black hole and spat it out somewhere. Seth knew that he would have to open a gateway himself, and he knew that he would need an immense amount of psychic energy to do it. He would have to find a place that was soaked with the energy of significant events, battlefields, tragedies, despair, and pain. He needed to find a place that was drenched with death. He didn't like where this quest was taking him, but he felt that he had no choice. He knew no better place than where a previous hellmouth had already opened and nearly swallowed up all of existence. That is, until they stopped it. Seth knew only one place that was home to more death and despair than any other that he could think of. the place where his mother's obsession was born and died. The home of the butcher, the monster, the mad doctor, the starving beast, the maniacal marionette, and the one that birthed them all, Akenifty Oniga, the Lady of the Water, Locust Lake, and the cursed land around it. Eventually, Seth passed out with his head down on the table. He had big plans ahead, but right now, he was completely worn out. Huck came out early in the morning, scratching his bare stomach that stuck out under his slightly rolled-up shirt. He yawned and looked around for something to have for breakfast, but instead of finding some food, first thing in the morning, he went back into his bedroom and came out with a blanket, where he laid it over the back of a snoring Seth. He had no idea what the young man was planning, because if he knew, he would be very much against it.
Mackenzie! What do you mean? What did you do to my sister? No, Mackenzie! Come on! Fight! No! No! Mackenzie! Mackenzie! Wake up! Wake up! Wake up!
Seth awoke several hours later due to a nightmare. The events played out in his dreams, like a night terror, reliving the moment he lost his twin sister over and over. Seth sat up to find a note from Huck sitting next to him. The note explained that Huck was out on a case with Jesse and that he would be back in a few days. Seth felt bad that he hadn't been helping Huck with any cases, or with anything else, really. He had withdrawn himself into his studies and fixing up the Torino, and thought of little else since that night. He couldn't think of anything else. He had to remain focused on the work at hand. He had only finished working on the Torino a few days beforehand, his plan nearly complete. Seth rubbed his eyes of fatigue and walked outside to check the mail in the box at the end of the driveway. When he peered inside, he saw the odd-looking envelope, bulky in the middle. He knew it was time, and specifically now was his chance. Huck was out on a case, and if everything went the way he wanted to, he would be finished before anyone even realized that he was gone. Seth walked briskly back inside to get dressed in his denim jeans and favorite flannel shirt, and the 2 bags he stashed in the barn for this exact occasion. Seth threw everything into the trunk, opened the barn doors, and slid into the driver's seat, placing the key in the ignition and giving it a turn. The Torino roared to life without so much as a single sputter, as if she was as raring to go as Seth was.
All right, old girl. Let's go get Mackenzie back,
Seth said, as he patted the steering wheel. As he pulled out of the driveway and began heading south towards the Pennsylvania border, Seth jacked his iPod into the new stereo that he had installed. Finally, he would have a variety of his music to choose from and listen to, but even he knew that music would do little to distract him from that which filled his every waking thought. What he was doing was not only reckless, but a bit dangerous as well. But Seth felt that he didn't have a choice. Mackenzie was reckless, and yeah, it got her taken away, but she would do the same for him. He had to try. Seth searched through that old book for months, and found that he could indeed reopen the door to wherever she was and get her back, but it would require a great deal of energy. The ritual to tear such a hole in the fabric of reality requires the sacrifice of many lives, like a historic battlefield, but someplace where evil incarnate has walked and been banished. A place where a rift had once been opened, where there was already a healing wound, so to speak. Someplace where something as powerful as a god has pierced itself into our existence. Seth could only think of one place, and as much as he racked his mind to think of someplace else, his thoughts always circled back to it. It had to be there. It was perfect. A place where he knew for certain that such a specific ritual could be performed correctly. His mother wouldn't be happy, but she just wouldn't find out. Seth merged with traffic on a long stretch of highway and began counting the minutes and miles that it would take him to reach the endless mountain region of Pennsylvania and the shores of Locust Lake. By the time the Torino had rolled into a vacant lot of a once thriving campground, it was already sunset. The glow to the west was a golden orange that stretched across the east in hues of reds and deep purples. Seth may have even taken in the beauty and awe of such wonderful scenery, but instead he watched as the lake rippled its reflection back as a bright shade of crimson. He had witnessed the horrors here himself, and heard much more from the stories his mother used to tell him and Mackenzie in preparation for their future. This land was evil incarnate, the lake an embodiment of sin, birthing demons to stalk unsuspecting victims in the night. But with preparation, skill, and a whole lot of luck, they had banished it once and for all, ridding the land and lake of its curse. Seth climbed out from the vehicle and shut the door behind him, never once taking his eyes off the water. He was here for a reason, and not even this place would stop him. Seth turned and scanned the area where he stood, looking up the mountain trails and off into the woods to his right, adjacent the lake. He had already visited the manor up the road, and because of his own experiences and those of his mother, he knew the layout of this mountain pretty well. He was almost done. Seth only needed a few more things before he could begin, and he knew exactly where to find them. A little over an hour later, the sky was now completely black, and the moon only barely visible behind the cloud cover. Seth stood by the shore, speaking words that he had only recently learned how to pronounce. Once finished, Seth pulled the items from the backpack that he had been carrying over his shoulder, now at his feet. The first item he withdrew was a small stick, nothing more, seemingly mundane other than the rich, black appearance of its bark. He eyed it for only a moment before tossing it into the water of the lake. Seth then pulled the next object from the backpack, which happened to be a small rock, one that he had gotten from the old, grown-over foundation nearby, one that belonged to an orphanage that burned down ages ago. He then, too, tossed that into the lake as well. Seth then tore a small corner off a piece of paper that he was holding, one that he and his sister had collected from the once active cult of locusts, and wadded up the small scrap of a corner into a small ball in his hand. He then withdrew a golden object from his pocket, an item that had come in the mail, and one that he was able to purchase from a collector of serial killer memorabilia. Seth further wadded the small piece of cultist page around the chain of the locket that once belonged to Dr. Clark herself, and tossed them into the lake simultaneously as well. Finally, Seth pulled a small amount of dirt from his other pocket, and that which he had gotten from underneath the mansion up the road in the mines, and proceeded to mix it with 2 drops of lake water, one for Akanifti Oniga, and one for the lake itself, mixing them into his hands to form mud, and finally, Seth washed his hands in the lake water.
In Halanipaso! Atin!
Seth yelled into the night as he shook his hands dry. There was no warning, and not even like he had been expecting it, but the portal he had summoned opened so instantly and powerfully that the force knocked Seth right off his feet, and as he was thrown backwards, Seth saw both a large portal of blue light and a thin, dark stream of smoke that lunged out through it, connecting with his chest and pushing him back further. Seth was thrown more than 15 feet through the air before he finally collided with the ground. Shaken, and having the wind knocked out of him, Seth struggled to get to his feet, rubbing his chest at where the thing had seemed to penetrate his being. And that's when he saw it. Even at a distance, the portal on the lake's shore was so large, he could see into the realm that he had opened a pathway to. As he walked closer, details began to define in the portal's swirling mist. Things of black stone like obsidian, firefalls that fell upwards, and inanimate things he couldn't truly describe if he tried. It was a place of surrealism and seemingly madness, foreign and almost hard to look upon. But at about 5 feet away, he finally saw who he had come for. His twin sister, Mackenzie. It actually took him a moment to even recognize her amidst the odd writhing tentacles that seemed to phase in and out of those obsidian stones, her body more than half buried beneath them and saturated with some unseen fluid. Seth yelled into the portal before him, desperately trying to get her attention, or even to move, but Mackenzie did nothing more than just lay there, unmoving. She was either dead or unconscious, but Seth didn't care which. At the very least, they would have her corpse to bury. But Seth still held hope, extending his hand into the portal, into the realm on the other side. Seth struggled to reach his sister, touching only her fingertips. He knew he couldn't enter, or he'd risk getting trapped there and never again having another chance to make things right. Seth stretched a little farther, as much of his arm or shoulder would allow, and gripped Mackenzie's right hand. And just then, the portal began closing, shrinking closer and closer to its center, collapsing. Seth pulled as hard as he could, getting her limp body to slide out from beneath those rope-like black tentacles and inch closer to the portal's edge. Seth didn't have much more time, but to his success, Seth managed to pull his sister free just as the portal fully collapsed with a boom.
Mackenzie? Mackenzie!
Seth shook his sister, trying to get her to open her eyes or say something, becoming more and more frantic with each shout. The ground beneath his knees began to rumble, and only for a moment Seth stopped to ponder why. The ritual was over, and Pennsylvania wasn't exactly known for its earthquakes, but Seth immediately refocused his attention on Mackenzie, wiping her face free of the translucent slime that covered her form and saturated her hair. He then checked for a pulse and signs of breath, and to his relief, both were present. Mackenzie was very much alive, but still unconscious.
Come on, sis. We gotta get you out of here.
Seth said to his unconscious sister, the ground quaking violently now, rippling the lake itself like a giant shaken glass of water. Seth picked up his sister from the ground beside the rolling waves of Locust Lake and threw her over his shoulder. Seth then turned to face the Torino around the bend of the shore, when he heard a faint sobbing from behind him, just loud enough to overpower the sound of the ground shaking. He was afraid of this, and did fully know that what he feared was a possibility. Seth turned. Mackenzie slumped over his shoulder to face the noise. At first, he didn't see it, because the night was so dark. But when it began sobbing again, the quaking now slowly receding, Seth's ears pointed him in the direction he should look. If it were not for the pinpricks of red floating disembodied in the darkness not far from where he stood, he would have passed it over again. For there, in the darkness before him, and walking ever closer, was a form made of what looked like shadow at first. It appeared as all black in the night, except for the pupils within its eyes that seemed to almost reflect red, the way an animal's eyes shine in the dark. Seth knew he should run for the car, but with every step the thing took, more and more details were revealed. The thing was not, in fact, made of shadow, but mud. Whatever this thing was, it was either made of lake mud or covered by it, and then he realized that this thing was a woman, and although she was crying, she looked as evil as any other monstrosity that he and his sister had put an end to. He didn't need to see more, and the woman had gotten close enough. Seth began running for the car, and as soon as he did, the woman stopped crying and shrieked an eerie death cry that Seth wished he could have covered his ears for. Still, more determined than ever, Seth kept running, partially hindered by the encumbrance of his sister. Mackenzie should have been emaciated, mostly skin and bone, and even though she was skinny anyway, Seth silently cursed her for every greasy burger that she had eaten. He'd have a better chance of getting away if she was a little easier to carry. Mackenzie wasn't heavy and relatively easy for him to lift, but more than difficult to run with. Seth couldn't tell if they were snakes or ropes or anything for that matter, but as he ran, the curled ends of muddy roots began to rise from the ground, trying to ensnare Seth's feet as he ran, but Seth picked up speed, hopping nimbly and quickly over each one, and as he reached the Torino, one last long vine-like appendage rose from the ground, nearly impossible to avoid without breaking stride. Seth flung Mackenzie over both shoulders, across his back, and sprang off the ground with his left foot, and tilted himself sideways, using the leverage of Mackenzie's body to twirl them through the air like a corkscrew, narrowly avoiding the curling roots that reached for him. Seth landed on his feet with a slide on the other side of the barrage of wriggling things that Seth now finally identified as tree roots. Behind them all, Seth could see her approaching, and as she walked, he could tell that it was more like the ground itself formed around her as she moved, as if made of the lake and land itself. Seth opened the back door and gently laid Mackenzie's body inside.
I'm happy to have you back, sis. We'll be out of here in a second.
Seth reassured his unconscious sister, simply satisfied to have her return to him. Seth then ran around to the trunk, as the thing shrieked in the night, getting closer with each moment that passed. Seth rifled through the things in the back, moving Mackenzie's dagger, her gun, his sawed-off, and both machetes, looking for what he found underneath it all. His research notes. Seth didn't even bother shutting the trunk. Instead, he scanned the pages as fast as he could, quickly turning to the next in a desperate attempt to find what he was looking for, before the terror he brought back ended them both. The mud at Seth's feet roiled and coiled upward, and the roots beneath rose, reaching for Seth and grasping at his ankles. Just before Seth was pulled off of his feet, he found what he was looking for. But it was too late. The incantation he needed required a symbol to be drawn, and he was no longer standing still. Instead, he was being dragged by the roots towards the monster that approached him at only 10 feet away. In a last-ditch effort, Seth reached up and gripped the end of the rear bumper, halting his being pulled across the ground. As Seth moved his mud-covered finger back and forth, the mud-soaked form of the red-eyed weeping woman was upon him, looking down on him, ready to strike.
Abkalu! Ziseru!
Seth yelled up at the thing. The hideous form shrieked as if in pain and began receding into the ground that she was a part of, mud rolling off of her as she dissolved slowly back into the earth. The roots that had risen like sentient tentacles receded back into the ground as well, allowing Seth to stand up. He knew it wouldn't be there for long, but Seth intentionally left the symbol that he had made on the underside of the bumper, just in case. Seth brushed himself off as best as he could and shut the trunk. He was covered in thick mud all the way down the back of his legs, but he climbed into the Torino anyway. He didn't want to. He knew that Mackenzie would have a fit, but he wanted to get the hell out of there, and it wasn't like she was awake anyway. Seth shut the door and started the engine, and the old girl purred like she was brand new. Seth revved the engine, proud of what he had done. Sure, it may have been foolish, but he had Mackenzie back, and that was all that mattered. But as Seth pulled down the old driveway leading up to the lake, he couldn't help but wonder, fear, that maybe he had brought something back. Something he banished, sure, but if he had brought back the evil at Locust Lake, one that now had been completely banished for over a year, then maybe he had stirred something up. Maybe its curse could be brought back again. Seth didn't stop to think about the impossible ways that this could happen. He was just happy to have his sister back. Besides, if the evil returned, they would surely hear of it, and simply return as well to stop it. Seth smiled with satisfaction, reaching the bottom of the hill and making his left towards New York State. Seth watched in his rearview mirror, not seeing Mackenzie, but knowing that she was there, eyes closed, safe, and alive at the very least. He didn't know how long it would take for her to wake up, but as he looked back to the road, eyes focused on the glowing stripes of the lanes ahead, Seth hit a small pothole, causing the Torino to shake but a little, and Mackenzie's eyes to shoot wide open. Well, it seems we came all this way only to wait just a little bit more. But at least all's well that ends mostly well. I'm sure he said the words right. So rejoice, the second season has finally kicked off, and Confronting Evil will return next month. Social media can be very unpredictable, especially regarding horror content. If this content gets removed, all new content will be simultaneously presented on various websites provided in the description to this video. Make sure to follow me in other digital spaces so that you never miss out on the terror. Also, if you like this video, make sure to leave a comment and hit the like button. It helps the channel a lot. If you're new to the channel and you enjoy what's here, consider hitting that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you never miss an upload. Writing is a dream of mine, and it's all of you that make that dream come true.